frightening as it might be, because so much about the Seder is already virtual. Now, I'm making large claims for the word virtual, so I should probably start by explaining what it means in this context. Obviously, we're spending most of our lives doing virtual things right now. But how is the Seder virtual? So in good Jewish fashion, I'll start by telling two stories. So the first story, which I told in the newsletter today, if that's how you found this, if that's how you found this webinar, you've heard it before. So I grew up going to a Seder where my Uncle Maury would always begin by saying, and now tonight we're going to relive the departure from Egypt using a variety of audiovisual technologies. And by this, of course, he meant the bitter herbs and the wine and the breaking the middle matzah and all these little tweaks to the senses, which cause you to not simply to talk about the departure for Egypt, but really to feel like you are experiencing it yourself. And the key quote from this, which we have this for reference on the first page of the virtual Haggadah supplement. I'll read it. It's quite short, but Suzanne, you can put it up if you want. The traditional Haggadah text says, "In every generation, one must look upon himself as if he personally had come out of Egypt, as the Bible says, and you shall tell your child on that day, saying, it is because of that which the Eternal did for me when I came out of Egypt." We don't really need this. It's it's right there. And you'll see that, of course, this is an old-fashioned version, so I changed the gender reading it aloud. Let me tell a second story about how this is supposed to work. So a couple of years ago, I was at an event with a noted environmental lecturer, and he came after several speakers who used film on the stage, and it was a darkened stage. He used a PowerPoint and a bunch of slides. They used a PowerPoint and a bunch of slides. And when this guy came up on the stage, he raised the house lights and he said, "Okay, I'm going to try an experiment here with a new technology. I don't have any slides. I'm just going to talk. And if this technology works the way it's supposed to, the pictures should appear directly in your head." So that, of course, is the sense in which we say the Seder is virtual. So much of it happens in our heads. So I'm hoping that by zooming in a little closer, so to speak, in this time of trouble, maybe it helps a little bit when it's so painful to contemplate everybody who's not at the table. Maybe it helps to lean in, so to speak, on the ways in which the Seder is filled with little gems of symbols that are really about what's not there and what's hidden and what hasn't happened yet, and ways in which things that seem very real as part of the Seder are really happening partly in our heads. And the idea is that, it might be helpful to learn how the Seder makes this idea central, and maybe how it draws all possible meaning from them, and maybe that can help us. And with that in mind, I pulled together a variety of readings and interviews. Some of the majority of them are from things we've asked our rabbis in this feature I edit called Ask the Rabbis, where we ask 10 rabbis of different denominations the same question. It's always a pleasure. It's a lot of people's favorite part of Moment. But a couple of not so long ago, maybe a year ago, we asked the rabbis, what is the role of virtual presence in Judaism? Who knew it was going to be this important? But so I'm just going to read a meditation from that sequence. I don't think you even need to put it up, Suzanne. And then we'll go on and we'll talk briefly about 3 things that we do in the Seder that aren't there, and then I'll take questions. So the meditation on virtual presence comes from Rabbi Chaim Ovadia, who's our Sephardic contributor most of the time. He's here in Potomac, Maryland, and he wrote to us, "Virtual prayer is not new. It has been around for roughly 3,000 years. King Solomon opens the inauguration of the temple in Kings by declaring that God dwells in the cloud. He asks God to heed the prayers of his people, as well as those of other nations who will have the temple in mind while they pray. In exile, Jews remained connected by chanting prayers at set dates and times. Isolated and cut off from others, they found comfort in knowing they were part of a larger, albeit unseen, community." So this is one of several excerpts from this forum that we pulled together. In another one, our conservative contributor from Springfield, Massachusetts, Rabbi Amy Katz, says, one of the Hebrew names for a synagogue is Beit Knesset, a house of gathering. With technology, we can gather, we can convene community from near and far, for the strong and the weak, for the hardy and for the frail. And so those are two thoughts about what we're talking about when we say an aspect of Judaism is virtual. Now let's talk about three things that are absolutely central to the Seder that aren't there. So the first one is the temple. The Passover celebration in ancient times, this is not news to anyone, was a giant pilgrimage down to the temple in Jerusalem to make the central to the of Passover, which was to sacrifice the Paschal Lamb. The Paschal Lamb was a direct symbol. Even in its day, it was a symbol of something that was not being experienced. This is to say, the symbol of the lamb that was slaughtered the night of before the Exodus from Egypt, when God commands the Jews to sacrifice a lamb to eat together in a meal, and then to smear the blood on the doorpost so the angel of death won't kill their firstborn son. And even then, there is a commandment, and I'm drawing a lot of this from a wonderful book that was recently featured in Moment and is just out, Vanessa Oakes's The Passover Haggadah, a biography. If this is showing, there's a link to a longer conversation between Vanessa Oakes and Robert Siegel at the end of the supplement if you're interested. But she points out that even in that initial commandment, the Jews are commanded to tell the story, even though it hasn't happened yet. They're being told, in the future days to come, you will always tell your children on this day about this thing that happened at all. It's completely virtual. So think about the biblical pilgrimage. One of the things Vanessa Oakes points out, and we do quote this, is how impossible it is to really imagine from the Seder we have now what was going on in these Seders of the past. And she says, this is at the bottom of the first page, she says, no Haggadah can orchestrate a family dining ritual that fully elicits the pilgrim's sense of communitas, the powerful group religious experience that breaks down boundaries. How could any liturgy compare with physically journeying up to Jerusalem among masses of people and the sound, smell, and taste of sacrificed lambs? But then she adds, true enough, the imaginative replacement for Passover, forged in the crucible of rabbinic Judaism, has been standing in for so long that it is no longer experienced as having once been new or compensatory. The Seder has become its own real thing with its own long past. And in the conversation with Robert Siegel, she points out that if you were looking in modern times for a way to capture what that experience would really have been like, this incredible mass migration of peoples, the closest you could probably come in the modern age is the Muslim Hajj, where people go to Mecca and you have this gigantic wave of people and everyone's together, and the religious experience comes from that. So we're having a Seder, and the Seder is just a stand-in for all these things that don't happen anymore. So it helps, I think, to think of our Seder as we're yet again removed from that. We're one step beyond. We're here at a Seder that's a stand-in for a regular Seder, and we're telling stories not only of all these layers of vanished observance, but also of the observance we ourselves have had in previous years. So it becomes a story told about a story, told about a story, told about an experience. And maybe that helps. And of course, at the heart of this, I'll mention this as another aspect of the same thing that isn't there. What else isn't there on the table that's absolutely central? The lamb. The lamb isn't there because there's no temple and no pilgrimage. We also can't sacrifice a lamb. Not that we want to, but we have the shank bone. It's a little bit of a pale stand-in. As Vanessa Oakes points out, sometimes it's just a beet. Some people use a beet now because they don't want to use the meat. And yet it is still a focus of the entire ceremony, various references to it. There are always references to it. So that's one thing, two things that aren't there. Another thing that isn't there, if you think about it, is the Afikomen. Now, the Afikomen might seem like a trivial thing compared with these major symbols. The Afikomen, people say, you get it, first of all, we get it back at the end. Secondly, people say, well, it's just a game for the children. It's something to keep them interested till the end. But if you think about that, even, I mean, that's a fundamental way. It's all about the way the human mind works. The first thing you play with children when they're babies is, where is it? Here it is. Where is it? Here it is. And so it speaks to something very deep in us. That's something you put the middle matzah away, and then someone takes it and it's gone, and you can't get it back until you go through all these different processes. People are so attached to this that I have actually seen in people's descriptions of how they're going to manage their virtual Seders. I've heard people say, well, we're going to go from room to room carrying the laptop. You know, we're going to really try to make it possible to participate in this. And that could work really well. But even if it doesn't, there's a lot about the Afikomen that speaks to sort of hiddenness. This is a traditional teaching. There's hiddenness and brokenness and things that haven't happened yet. And if you've been on our website lately, there's a poem by Jean Nordhaus, which has recently gone up, called Afikomen. We've put it in the supplement for easy reading, and I will read it now. I don't know if you can find it, Suzanne. It is on page 6. It's on the 6th page under Yachatz, breaking the middle matzah. See if you can get, I don't know if you can get to it. I'm not seeing the picture. And I'll read the second half of it, where she talks about how the matzah is reluctant to be chosen. It's shy, it hangs back. She says, why then, with all these giant symbols, she starts by saying, and then in the middle of the poem, she picks it up saying, why then, when you ask for a poem, am I haunted by the Afikomen, the shy half matzah, wrapped in a napkin babushka, then spirited away to be hidden in a corner cabinet, behind a bookcase, in a cushion, a crease, reluctant as Moses to be chosen, and only hours later, when the children are nodding, and we're flushed with sweet wine and singing, remembered and rescued, redeemed for $1, a pittance, a coin. So I think in some ways that the Afikomen helps us think about all the things that we can't quite reach about the Seder. The whole idea of breaking the matzah and putting away half of it for later has to do with things that haven't happened yet, things we can't quite get to. And so in this, she talks about chosenness, but hiddenness is also part of it. So hiddenness takes us to the third thing I wanted to focus on, and that is Elijah. And you have it in the beginning of our Seder. The graphic on the front of the supplement is some kind of medieval rendition of somebody who might be Elijah. And the caption says, Elijah is a thoroughly virtual personage none of us has ever seen. In fact, his defining characteristic is that he is not there. So what's the story with Elijah? We usher him in by opening the door, a physical movement. And we're looking for two things at that point that aren't there. One is one's the wily anti-Semite who might be lurking outside the door. The time you open the door for Elijah, if you do the traditional Haggadah, which I know some people don't feel comfortable with in this day and age, when you open the door, you also call down a really angry, you call down curses on the enemies of the Jews, who have laid waste to Jacob, who've, destroyed Jacob and laid waste to his habitation. And then, and the story is that, of course, you're opening the door in case somebody thinks something bad's going on inside. You want to show you have nothing to hide. So that's one thing from history. But then you wait for Elijah, and, Elijah is the prophet who is supposed to come basically at the end of history, tie up all the loose ends. He's supposed to reconcile the parents with the children and the children with the parents, which you presume from that traditional teaching that it's a thing that's elusive. And the other thing, I really love this. He is supposed to resolve all the lingering legal questions that the scholars couldn't agree on in Judaism. All the things that the Talmud didn't come to a conclusion on. Elijah's going to come and tell us who's right. So a couple of years ago, we asked the rabbis, should Jews at the Seder call on God to smite their enemies? It seemed like one of the really questions remaining open. And we got a lot of interesting answers, and we put two of them in the supplement. I'm going to offer you the second one here. It's on the, if you want to look at it, it's on the second to last page at the bottom. And our Rabbi Laura Novak Weiner, who's a Reform rabbi in California, who often contributes, says, who is Elijah? We all are Elijah. As Jews, we are each God's partner in the creation and the ongoing perfection of the world. God calls upon each of us to heed the prophet's call to heal the sick, feed the hungry, fight injustice, and bring about a time of peace, prosperity, and wholeness. This work gives us hope and looks ahead to the Messianic time. An individual Messiah, she says, cannot and will not do that for us. We are all part of the Messianic process. So that's one way of looking at Elijah, is that he's a stand-in for all the things that no one can really do but we ourselves. And now that I look at, there's another rabbi, a Reconstructionist rabbi, Rabbi Fred Sherlinder Dobb, who also, I used something from him, also it's also in the supplement. He says, among other things, the best Jewish teachings, he echoes this, discourage searching for wonder workers. But then he says, then he rejects that in part. To deny all messianic possibility is defeatist. Moderate messianism leads us to enlightened activism. Like many progressive Jews, I hold out for a messianic era, a distant vision that inspires and sustains today's necessary work. So those are a couple of things to think about absence and things, working with things that aren't there and finding them in some ways more powerful than even if they really were there. That's a taste of our supplement. There are so many more things hidden and missing that turn up in the Seder, and we've tried to cover some. There's the fifth son, who's the son who isn't there is just, well, let's say the fifth child. There are rabbis who say the four children are all very well, but it's the fifth child who's not at the table that you need to focus on. There's an interesting meditation in our archives about how sometimes the most beloved Jewish foods in the festival meal are the ones clung to by communities that aren't actually keeping the kosher laws. It's almost in memory of laws that aren't there. You cling to the characteristic foods of the Seder of the community instead. So there are a lot of things like that we can look at, and I hope that at your table you'll just take these as the merest starting off points, and that it'll open up to ways of discussing and arguing, since that's what we do. Let me take some questions, if you have any.
Yes, if there's any questions, you can type it in the chat box, which is at the bottom of your screen. If you hover at the bottom, you'll see where it says chat.
Should I just look at them?
You can look at them, or I can read them as well.
I don't see any questions. we were definitive or something.
Anyone? Give people a second in case they're in the middle of typing a long question.
Let's see if there's anything else in the meantime that I would read.
In the meantime, I'm going to put in the box right now is the direct link to the supplement that if you have not downloaded it, you can do afterwards. And I will one more time put in the link that will take you to the page where we have a lot of different links to the articles and resources and other light fare. You should be able to access that.
So, yeah, I see a few questions. So Steve Price wants to know, to everyone, and again, people could also type answers to this. I'll be happy to read them. So is the whole of the Seder a celebration / contemplation of absence? And I think, I mean, it's like any interpretation. The more deeply you go into it, the more it seems to cover everything. I would certainly say it's certainly, I mean, I guess all of our symbolic actions around the Jewish year look to a thing that isn't there, or a thing that is no longer there and might be there again someday. There's the whole the whole thing, the whole focus on Israel and the temple. It's not just about the Seder. I think I could say, I could just say yes, obviously this is what the Seder is, but the Seder is so many things, including that. We'll see. We'll find out how well it holds up this year. So somebody else asked me and everyone, are you going to be leading a virtual Seder this year? I don't know if my family will actually do this. I will say, just personally, one of the most memorable Seders I ever had in my life was a Seder when I was traveling, actually traveling with a boyfriend, and we wound up in a place where we couldn't attend a Seder, and we had a Seder, just the two of us, in a hotel room, having done a very hurried sweep of the local markets. And although it was not a complete Seder in a lot of ways, it was incredibly moving. And we certainly felt we had observed the holiday, even if not perfectly. So I'm personally inclined to just have our family's lucky to be together. I'm just inclined to have it with the five of us. So let's see, I'm looking at other questions. So Nechama Masliansky says, just to say, my Zayda used to say that the Mashiach is a generation that does the right thing and elevates the world to another level, right? Not a person, but a whole historical moment. And I think that makes very good sense. That's another good way to think of it. Mashiach is not a person, but a time. And I don't know, there's this other story. There's so many references, there's so many places this story appears that I didn't think we really should put it in the supplement, but there's an old Hasidic story about how a rabbi used to do a ritual at a particular place in the woods and used to say a particular blessing, and the miracle would happen and the community would be saved. And in later generations, the community forgot the words of the blessing, but remembered the place in the woods. And so the rabbi would go to the place in the woods and say, Master of the universe, we don't remember the words, but we remember the place in the woods, and may that be enough. And it would be enough, and the community would be saved. And then in many later years, I'm telescoping this somewhat, but in later years, the place in the woods had been forgotten, or the community no longer had access to it. And so the rabbi would pray, Master of the universe, we don't remember the words and we don't remember the place in the woods, but we remember the story, and that has got, please let that be enough. And that too would be enough. So that's another way of meditating on absence. My editor wants to know other favorite Ask the Rabbi questions to plug our endeavor. Let's see, we asked, well, we've asked them, we did ask them a couple of years ago, that's where I pulled some of these answers from, are Jews still expecting a Messiah? That's where some of those answers came from about Elijah. Elijah was brought in by the rabbis, not by us. So that one I think is relevant. And a couple of years ago, we also wanted to know, and I know that Nadine, our editor-in-chief, has written about this separately, should we invite non-Jews to our Seder? Because there was a time when that was there's some traditional law that says you can't cook for non-Jews, but obviously in modern times, it's been much more common to open the Seder to everybody, including non-Jews. So that was an interesting answer.
Here we go. The next question, Steve Price has, where does the theme of transience fit into the virtual Seder framework? We're making an exodus from point A to point B. Is this year an exodus from one state of being pre-COVID to a new and unfamiliar one, with memory bridging the two?
I like that. Yes, that's a very nice thought. It's a scary thought because we don't know what's on the other side of the sea. If we're crossing the sea to a new and unexplored place, or way of being, we don't know what's coming. But I guess that's always the nature of an exodus, isn't it? You don't know where you're going. It's the original leap of faith. We do have a section in here when we talk about Magid. We used a poem Marge Piercy wrote about Magid, in which she draws the connection to current refugees. And the thing about there too, the idea of refugees is not, one, you don't know where you're going, and two, and I've always found this very powerful, you drop everything. You know, that's why the bread can't rise. You just drop everything. If you waited till you finished what you were doing, you would never leave until you were forced to.
Great. And then Michelle Rose asks, and if others also have answers to this question, please feel free to type it in the chat box. She conducts religious services at a senior living facility, and as no outside visitors are allowed now, any ideas of how to do it when the residents are not technologically savvy enough to use Zoom and they can't all gather in one room at a time?
It's a good question. I think I guess it depends a lot on how able these residents are to listen to a story. If they are somewhat clear in their minds and they can appreciate listening to a familiar story, then it may not matter so much how many people are in the room. On the plus side, I think older people are from a generation, unlike ours, where it was more, it was a familiar thing to listen to stories in a human voice and to be able to relate to that. I think older people in general aren't as dependent on screens and visual cues as some of us have become in this era where we have them. Conference. Steve Price says, "How about a conference call on room phones?" Which is a great idea. Again, you'd have the voice. The voice telling is the central part of this holiday, and I think it brings back, in a powerful way, the power of just the human voice telling a story. Yes, Michelle Rose says, well, maybe not. They can barely use their cell phones. I wonder if it could be a loudspeaker type of situation. I once knew a family that had emigrated from Morocco, where they had a specific rabbi who gave a Sephardic Seder, and we were invited to their house for Seder once, and the entire Seder consisted of sitting around the table and listening to this tape playing of their rabbi from long ago, from back home. And they would just play the tape and listen, and then they'd eat the food, and that was that.
And our editor Nadine would like to know, how does Passover connect with time? There are 3 laws against it. What she's asking is, how does Passover, oh, we just lost it. How does Passover, I think it said connect with, how does Passover connect to the Jewish concept of time?
One thing about the Jewish concept of time is there are many different types of time, I think, happening simultaneously, so to speak, in Jewish philosophy and tradition. One, which is very important, is that everything is kind of all happening at the same time. You've seen the idea that we're all still at Sinai, that every Jew, even born later, even converted in, was somehow at Sinai. There's an Orthodox dating site called Saw You at Sinai, which I always thought was a great line. And there's this kind of eternal present going on. If you look at if you study Talmud at all, you will see that rabbis are addressing each other across centuries as if it were yesterday. And they're saying, you say this, but what about this? And then the third rabbi from another time and place answers, and you study it as if it's all happening in the same room. Nothing more virtual than the Talmud. So there are competing ideas of time. Some people argue that Jews or monotheists, so to speak, invented the idea of time not as a cycle, but as a straight line, starting at point A, creation, and continuing until the Messiah, and that previous cultures were much more cyclical. But there are other schools of thought that Jewish time is extremely cyclical. And of course, we see that in all these prayer cycles. And the people are, I don't know, I used to read, I've read some Christian theology as well. And there's a Christian idea that somehow that, people are down here on a timeline, but God's up here in an eternal present, and everything is happening at the same time for God. But in Jewish thought, it's actually exactly the opposite, because it's the people who are in an eternal present. When you daven, when you pray, and when you do these rituals, as we said at the outset, everything comes together in a single moment. It doesn't really matter when you're doing it. You're all doing it together. Okay. So Michelle says maybe using a tape in an old age home is good. I hope that works out. That sounds like a really big challenge, but I will be surprised. I wonder if people have memories. People in these homes can be prompted to come up with memories from long, long ago, from their childhoods. But I don't know. It depends what your clients are like. Let me see if I missed any questions.
And can you share, Allison wants to know, can you share references about Seder's past in difficult historical circumstances?
Well, we can try to get, I don't have links at my fingertips, but there are famous stories about Seders somehow cobbled together even in concentration camps. I don't know. We'll look online, and we'll try to provide you with a link. I will say one of my favorite fictional depictions of a Seder in difficult circumstances is in a spy novel by my former colleague David Ignatius, the columnist who wrote it. It's a spy novel set in Israel and the Arab world called Agents of Innocence. It must have come out sometime in the 90s, maybe. And in it, there's a small group of people under deep, deep cover in, I think it was Amman. They're in Jordan at a time of when Israel and Jordan are still at war, and they're all posing as Arabs, and they are completely undercover, and they never speak to each other, and so forth. So one night they get and they're completely cut off from any Jewish identity, and one night they get a coded message saying they need to have a meeting, and they appear at the home of this person whom they also don't know, but who, unbeknownst to them, is their station chief. And the shades are all down, and they're asked to sit around the conference table. And then the station chief begins speaking in a low tone, and someone brings out matzah, and they realize they're actually at a Passover Seder under deep, deep cover. And it's just a great scene.
And Nadine says that we once published a story about a Seder in Afghanistan by a reporter. So if that's not part of our update, maybe we can share that link so people can see that. And Allison also said that she read a children's story about a Civil War Seder on the battlefield. That's
wow.
Very interesting. Yes, if you have that link, Allison, if you could share that with us, that would be great.
So I have one more thing, which if I can find it, I have a text of it, and if I can find it, I'll read it to you. If anyone's ever been to the National Museum of American Jewish Military History, which is down on our street, a small but lovely museum, there are a series of telegrams on the wall between a couple of stations. This is a World War II station. Let me see if I can find this, because it's really fun. And let's see, it'll take me a second, but the basic idea was that one of the things that the military commanders did after as they were sort of mopping up from war was they exchanged messages with other stations, and rabbi, the chaplain assigned to one of these stations received, let's see if I have it. Could this be it? No, this isn't it. Sorry, I'm gonna try to find this. But the general idea was that the code station chief came to this chaplain and said, "Rabbi, I got a weird coded telegram. I don't understand half the words in it, but maybe you can help." And the words, it said, it was from the chaplain at some other station, and it said, need to do Seder, don't have any grain, horseradish. And so the rabbi, I wish I could find this, it's much better stated. If you'll bear with me just a second, guys, I can probably do this better.
Just real quick while you're looking for that, we're told that there's a Dara Horn novel. I'm not sure if Dara Horn's novel is referring to the children's story from the question before about background info. Both sides of the Civil War, soldiers came together for Seder. And then Nadine asked about wondering what people did in 1918 during the Spanish flu of the Black Death era. And Francie, you're asking about the different night. I'm not sure which book you're asking if that's referring to.
A different night. That's a good. I'm not finding this. Let's see. I don't know how to operate my albums very well. Places.
Okay, we think Dara Horn's title is All Other Nights. She had web extra info, but we're not sure if that is the children's one or not. But that's a good look up Dara Horn if you're interested in finding more about the Passover Seders and celebrating during the Civil War time.
Anyway,
that's the same one that you're talking about, Francie, the different night. Okay. And it's not the children's book.
It's not the children's book. Okay, Washington calendar. I'm sure I can find this if I.
Well, how about maybe we can send an email to everybody. We can send an email to everybody afterwards. We can put together the various titles of books and the Moment article and what you were looking for, and we can send it as a follow-up to everybody.
Right. Yeah. The basic idea was so that he organized a couple of jugs of horseradish, sent them off to this station, and a couple of days later, the radio guy came back and said, "Oh, Rabbi, it's another one of these weird coded messages," and this one said, "Toda Rabbah, grain is here, a kosher Pesach, and Chag Sameach." So.
Okay, great. Okay. And Nadine said that someone in the DC area is looking to donate matzah for senior centers, to senior centers or nursing homes who might need it. So if anyone has a suggestion where we may be able to tell people to do that, please let us know. I will just add my 2 cents in that our congregation has reached out to people who are shut in and cannot pick up food, and people are ordering food from various restaurants in the area, and then we have volunteers who are going to deliver it to a lot of the seniors in the community so that they at least can have food and celebrate the holiday. Dina asked a great question. Let me just find it again. During the Civil War, I'm sorry. Francie,
yeah, she says here to comment. Yes, I see it. On the chief rabbinate.
Yes.
Israel's decree that no Zoom Passover is allowed. Well, we actually put something about that in the supplement because and the context at the time I was pulling this together was, of course, a dispute because he did this, I think, in response to the Sephardic chief rabbi. Let me find the quote. It says all the major movements of Judaism have issued legal rulings that the commandment to preserve life not only allows virtual seders, Zoom seders, but also actually actively prohibits things like minyans in your home for prayer and large gatherings. But several Sephardic, it says, I'm quoting from the Times of Israel, in what may be one of the boldest rulings issued on technology in recent years, several Sephardic Orthodox rabbis in Israel declared that families may conduct their shared Seder over video conference, saying, just as it is permissible for a non-critical patient to receive treatment on Shabbat in order to cure him of illness, such is the case here. Other rabbis disagreed, and the Ashkenazi chief rabbi criticized the ruling, branding it irresponsible and beyond ridiculous. So I don't know what to say about that, really. It sort of speaks for itself. It's possible that these, along with other reasons for doing this, these rabbis are nervous about allowing people too much access to technology, since once you're on, you can kind of go anywhere. That might be part of it. It might just be a need to be more orthodox than the other guy. It seems like a mistake to forbid this, even though, as I say, it's possible that people can work the Seder so that you don't need it to be virtual. But for people, I think, stuck at home doing a Seder by themselves, it's kind of rough.
So, just real quick, Francie wanted to add that during the Civil War, there was a report that soldiers used bricks from Aurora. And then Sharon is asking if you have a reference for the story about forgetting the blessing, forgetting the place, but remembering the meaning.
I'll find it. It's somewhere in the.
Okay.
It's a midrash. It's somewhere in there, and it has something to do with the I think it has to do with the Baal Shem Tov, but I will find that.
And we can add it to the list that we email out.
Okay. Well, that sounds good. Steve Price points out that it's worth reading the Sephardic ruling on virtual Seders, on video conferencing Seders in full. And I know that it's true that same rabbi, I think, or others from the Sephardic movement in Israel have issued quite a few interesting rulings, including that if you are waiting for test results, you must keep your phone on over Shabbat to receive them, which is very interesting. And in Israel, I don't know if people are following this, but they're actually operating in a situation where the Minister of Health, who's from the Satmar movement, who has now tested positive for coronavirus, and people are very angry because he's also been for in previous weeks he's met with a lot of people. He's not been following the distancing rules, and now he's tested positive. So that'll be interesting. Another political thing. I see somebody, Nehama, pointed out that one of the things about the Seder and time is that it happens in the spring. It must take place in the spring, and that we go to a lot of trouble to keep it in the spring in the calendar. And by that, I suppose you mean that the Jewish calendar, unlike, say, the Muslim calendar, does not, even though it's a different length from the solar year, it doesn't slide around the calendar. Is that right? So we add a month every 7 years to keep the Jewish holidays where they are relative to the external calendar. And I suppose that also has to do with them being harvest festivals, because the other level of this is the harvest. So.
And I just wanted to quickly jump back to Dina when we talked about Israel's decree. Just wondering if that will drive a wedge between Israel and the diaspora. Something.
Interesting question. I mean,
yeah.
I guess we'd have to see, more likely between the Sephardi and the Ashkenazi, but I'm thinking that the number of people it affects directly will be more likely to be inside of that community, whether in the diaspora or in Israel. The families that can't get together because of this ruling maybe will be mostly in that community. I suppose it might. I don't know what the rulings have been actually in the American Haredi community on this. I had the impression that they had all taken the more liberal view, and that it was only the Israeli chief rabbi who didn't, but that could change. I mean, if they're seen as going against David Lau and Rabbi David Lau in Israel, it's possible they'll change their ruling. I haven't seen that. So what else? 7 times. Sorry. So right. It's I've been corrected on the timing of the leap year. It's 7 times in 19 years you add a month. So.
And then why don't we end with this a Hasidic story, one more version, one where we remember the place collected in Martin Buber books and more places. I'm not.
Oh, thank you. Do you want to put that up? or I guess it's not a link. It's just a
Right.
book reference. But have we missed anybody's contributions? I appreciate this group. I think there's a lot more wisdom out in the group than here in my library.
So I think with that, we will end. Like I said, we will put together all of these other additional resources that people brought up, and we will email that to everybody. Thank you, Amy, for presenting our very first Zoominar. And I would say, again, remember that we have lots more resources on our website, and you can, again, go there and download the supplementary Haggadah. And you just please note, you will need to put your name and email address in there again to be able to download that. And
I just say I had to put my name and email address in to access this Zoominar. So apparently the link's not very sophisticated, but go on.
Somebody asked if there will be a link to this recording. Yes, we have recorded it, though I do think it wasn't on for the very first few moments, but after that, it's a go, and we will figure all that out. As I said, this is our first one, so we're still working with the technology as well. And I hope that you will all join us again in a week and a half. We're doing the next Zoominar in between the first 2 days and last 2 days of Pesach. And everybody, please stay healthy and have a wonderful holiday. Thank you very much.
Chag Sameach, everybody. Take care. Stay safe.